Joining me now from Atlanta is Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s son. He's human rights advocate and community activist, Martin Luther King III. Welcome to the show. We just heard your father's powerful words. You've heard them. They probably echo in your mind all the time. Is his dream still a dream, or is it a reality?
I would have to say that elements of my father's dream have become a reality, but a vast amount of it still has not been achieved in our nation and certainly throughout the world.
President Obama did very well when it comes to the African American vote, the Hispanic vote, the Asian American vote, and yet he lost the white vote by 20 points. Race is still a big issue in this country, wouldn't you say? What do you read in all of that?
Well, I think we are constantly in a growth pattern, and while race is still an issue, we are far better than we were 45 years ago at the time of my father's death. We are a much better nation. The fact that the Democratic Party could come together and mount enough support between Democrats and Republicans and independents to elect President Obama to a first term and now a second term, I think is quite significant.
Some supporters of President Obama might point to those figures, though, and say that there are still some white people in the United States who are not comfortable with an African American as President of the United States. Would you agree with that?
No question. That is a fact. That's not an understatement. That's a fact. But I think the majority of Americans are more concerned about a president who is going to be able to deliver a vision that is inclusive of all the people. And I think the president tries very, very, in a major way to ensure that everyone is included.
There's been so much discussion about a post-racial America. There has been so much that has been read into the presidency of Barack Obama. And recently, Frederick Harris, a political scientist from Columbia University, wrote, "We are not a post-racial society in which race no longer matters. At best, we are a post-racist society in which formal legal barriers against African Americans and other minorities have been eliminated, but the legacy of those barriers endures." Would you agree with that?
I would certainly agree with that. I think that others certainly may have different points of view, but I think he's absolutely correct. We're not a post-racial society yet. Race still matters. When you look at the numbers of black and Latino persons who are in jail, part of the population of African Americans is 13%. The jail population is 50, 60, 70, 80%. And so clearly there's a targeting of people of color. And of course there's a high number of Latinos in prison and poor whites. So the justice system is a reflection of, in one area, of where America has got to figure out how do we change this paradigm and make it work. I'm not suggesting that there are not some people in jail who belong there, but a substantial number of them are there because they were not able to get proper representation. And that's just one area. If you look at contracting, the city of New York may spend billions of dollars on procurement, and I can assure you that African Americans do not participate at a level more than 3 to 5%, if that. And that, if New York City, which is a progressive city, is like that, what is it like in the rest of the nation? So my point is there are many areas where discrimination still exists that we've got to overcome, and we will. We will.
You know, your father spent so much time trying to erase these barriers. Do you think he'd be surprised that this legacy would endure once the barriers were removed?
Do I think he would be surprised?
If he were alive today, do you think he'd be surprised?
Oh, I think he would be disappointed, probably not surprised. And it really depends on whether or not he had lived the entire time and he and his team had been working to eradicate all of these barriers. I mean, if he just arrived here, see, there are two points of view. If he just arrived, he'd be highly disappointed, would hope that we were further down the road. But he also would be hopeful. He was an optimist always. He believed to the end in nonviolence and still would believe that we must find nonviolent solutions to resolve our problems. He wanted to address the evils of poverty, racism, and militarism and violence within our society. As I said, we've made great strides in race. In relationship to poverty, we've gone backward, and there are more people thrust in poverty Part of it is because many people had dug themselves out of holes by getting homes, and then the foreclosure crisis came along and thrust people back into poverty. And then as it relates to violence and militarism, we unfortunately continue to make systems for destruction, but there's no need for them. And then, of course, violence in our society is beyond epidemic levels. And so maybe the gun control initiative that the president has proposed will head us in the right direction, but we've got a lot of work to do in that area.
Well, you know, I want to read one of the quotes from your father because I think it touches on a lot of what you just said. He said, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." I mean, you've heard that quote, I mean, probably a million times, and yet you just touched on it. The U.S. spends more than the next 10 nations combined when it comes to the military. The values seem to be mixed up still, even to this day. I mean, that was an appeal he was making when LBJ was president. It's the same sort of appeal that could be made as President Obama sits in the White House today.
No question, and that would be one of the areas where my father would challenge the administration in a dramatic way. And the nation and the people have to speak up. I don't think the elected officials or elected official in this context, the president alone, certainly the president can beat a drum and forecast a path. But the people have to demand the civil kind of society that Dad was talking about. And it really is amazing that we are spending that level of money or resources on defense and not trying to create the climate where people will truly respect us in terms of our dignity and our worth. I think if you create the climate where you're respected, it's all right, I guess, to have military power, although I wish we were at a different place. One day, many eons from now, people will look back on our behavior and say that we maybe were barbaric and uncivilized in a way because we had to rule by force. But hopefully we as a world, as a nation and as a world community will grow to understand that we as people must learn how to treat each other with dignity and respect. When we do that, then we have to depend, I think, less on weapons, superior weapons, to retain our position. But it's almost like a cycle that we have gotten into, and that cycle has to change.
You know, anybody who watched the inauguration the other day wouldn't have any problem spotting you. You were just a few rows behind the President of the United States as he was taking the oath. But not all African Americans are happy with this president. And I want to play a clip from Professor Cornel West reacting to President Obama using your dad's Bible for his oath of office. Let's take a listen.
When I got the news that my dear brother Barack Obama, President Obama, was going to put his precious hand on Martin Luther King Jr.'s Bible, I got upset. And I got upset because you don't play with Martin Luther King Jr. and you don't play with his people. And by his people, what I mean is people of good conscience, fundamentally committed to peace and truth and justice, and especially the black tradition that produced him. All the blood, sweat, and tears that went into producing a Martin Luther King Jr. generated a brother of such high decency and dignity that you don't use his prophetic fire as just a moment in a presidential pageantry without understanding the challenge that he presents to all of those in power, no matter what color they are.
It's a lot to consume, but I wanted to get your reaction. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would only differ slightly, and certainly I understand and appreciate Dr. Cornel West and his point of view. But, you know, from my perspective, the hope was and is that the president and Congress would derive inspiration, spiritual inspiration, from being sworn in with a Bible that Martin Luther King Jr. used all throughout our nation as one of his traveling Bibles. That is always what the hope is. And I think it is quite phenomenal that a president would be sworn in. I would have had the same hope had it been the King holiday fallen when President Bush was taking office. And I don't necessarily see that as a mockery, because the goal is that the spiritual inspiration that Dad derived, that hopefully the President and Congress would derive as well, so that we can get many positive things done for the people, for the American people.
Well, Martin, we've run out of time for questions, but thank you so much for joining us from Atlanta. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.